there. Thank you for being here to talk soccer for the next hour and something and another. Something and other. That's not a phrase that people use. Not starting out well today. But we will find the groove. Big show for you on tap on a Friday. Two very good guests lined up. We're going to go from Germany to Mexico. Ross Dunbar will join us first to talk about, Bayern Munich and what they did against Juve in the Champions League. We'll also touch on the draw for the next round, which we now have. The Bayern Munich signing David Alaba to a new contract. Dortmund in the Europa League. Plenty to talk about in Germany. Then Eric Gomez will join us. We had an aborted Eric Gomez appearance last time. It didn't happen. There was a timing issue. Something about clocks and springing forward or back or whatever we do at this time of the year. So Eric will join us to talk about the Mexico roster. It's actually good timing because now we have an El Tri roster to talk about with Eric Gomez. We can actually go into absences, surprise inclusions. We can talk about the Clásico last week as well. We can touch on the CONCACAF Champions League, which involves only Mexican teams, and talk Liga MX and the like. All right, here we go. Let's start with the news before we line up Ross Dunbar. Champions League draw held in Neon? Is it Neon or Nyon? These are important. I should have done Forvo for this one. Neon, Switzerland today. Barcelona facing Atletico Madrid. Real Madrid facing Wolfsburg. Bayern Munich facing Benfica. And PSG facing Manchester City. I will flat out say it. I hate this draw. I don't like this draw at all. I don't know. There's something about it. I don't know. It's not good enough for me. I don't know. I would rather see maybe not Barcelona against Atletico, not at this point. Maybe not Barcelona against Real Madrid either, but Barcelona PSG could be fun in this round. Barcelona Manchester City could be fun. I don't know. I just don't like this particular draw, but we will get four winners and move on to the semifinals where things will get even more intense and it'll be fun regardless. Europa League. United and Liverpool yesterday in the right to go on to the quarterfinals of that tournament. 1-1 is the final from Old Trafford. Coutinho scores for Liverpool after United goes up through an Anthony Martial penalty. Liverpool advances 3-1 on aggregate, so they are moving on. Valencia beats Athletic Bilbao 2-1. Athletic goes through on away goals 2-2, however. Sparta Prague 3-0 at Lazio, which Lazio not showing up in this particular round of this tournament is a bit of a surprise, especially against Sparta Prague. Sparta Prague going through 4-1 on aggregate. Bayer Leverkusen and Villarreal play to a goalless draw. Villarreal goes through 2-0 on aggregate. Braga 4-1 winners over Fenerbahce, and they advance 4-2 on aggregate. Dortmund gets past Spurs 2-1 winners at White Hart Lane, 5-1 on aggregate. So Dortmund moving on. Sevilla 3-0 over Basel after a goalless first leg. So Sevilla through as they defend their title. Anderlecht 0-1. Shakhtar Donetsk with a win on the road. Shakhtar through 4-1 on aggregate. And here is your quarterfinal draw in what we are calling, I'm sure, some kind of clever name involving Jurgen Klopp. Dortmund will face Liverpool. Athletic Bilbao will face Sevilla. Villarreal will face Sparta Prague. And Braga will face Shakhtar Donetsk. So there's your Europa League draw. UEFA, in light of some activities in the stands at Old Trafford, has opened a disciplinary hearing against Manchester United and Liverpool after a clash. There were 5 arrests involved in this. The arrest followed a troubling incident that involved a banner reading "murderers" and referencing the date of the Hillsborough disaster being hung along the highway leading from Liverpool to Manchester. So we're not being nice these days, the Manchester United fans, towards the Liverpool fans and vice versa. Despite the roster not being released, U.S. men's national team head coach Jurgen Klinsmann has said that he will bring injured Josie Altidore to camp. Altidore went down with a hamstring injury before the start of the MLS season, has not yet played for a TFC this year through 2 matches. The United States, of course, plays Guatemala in 2 qualifiers on March 25th and 29th. Again, no roster, but Klinsmann's talking about bringing in Altidore. Like to see a roster. Klinsy, thank you very much. Finally, FIFA has issued a financial report that revealed the organization lost $122 million last year. Now, that's the first time in 13 years that FIFA has reported a loss. So they in the red for the first time in 13 years. They spent $62 million in legal fees last year, combating the criminal authorities, the criminal complaints brought by authorities in the United States and Switzerland. $62 million bucks. Now, don't worry. It's okay. FIFA still has $1.34 billion in cash reserves. So, yeah, they're doing okay on that front. The financial report also revealed Sepp Blatter made $3.76 million in 2015, which I don't think is a surprise to anybody that he got paid, because that's what happened. A couple other details here. The total compensation for Sepp Blatter was actually 2.964 million Swiss francs, but that brought that there were other incentives, $450,000 in variable compensation, which is a long service entitlement for reaching 40 years of employment at FIFA. There you go. Despite as I mentioned, despite the crisis, their total income last year, they lost $122 million. Thinking, wow, that's a lot of money. Their revenue was $1.152 billion last year. Their expenses were $1.274 billion. So that's the loss there. But they're still FIFA operating in the stratosphere when it comes to this money. FIFA spent $27.9 million last year paying executive committee members and senior management, including Sepp Blatter and Jerome Valk, who got 2.125 million Swiss francs. That total had been $39.7 million in 2014. So a $9 million drop, or that's a $12 million drop in the amount of compensation given out to executive committee members. Still pretty ridiculous. Each executive committee member, including Sino Galati, by the way, received $300,000 last year. Senior Vice President Issa Hayatou of Cameroon was also handed an additional $500,000 for chairing the financial committee. So if you sit on the finance committee, which your responsibility, I imagine, is to keep things responsible on the finance end, you get $500,000 for doing so. Okay, that makes sense. And remember, this is a non-profit organization. So FIFA malfeasance out there, but let's talk some actual soccer. Germany, Mexico, two excellent guests. We'll try to squeeze in some phone calls at the end of the show as well. Stay right there. Ross Dunbar will join us. We'll talk all about German football. It's Soccer Morning. It's on backheel.com.
Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
All right, we are back on Soccer Morning. It's Friday. Friday means we get to look forward to a weekend of soccer, and we may do some preview stuff here with Ross Dunbar, who joins me now to talk German football. But we're going to have to review the last week. I mean, it's been pretty crazy in the world of German football, and we'll start. Hi, Ross. First of all, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, Jason. How are you?
I'm well. Obviously, I'm a little focused in here. We have to start with Bayern Munich. We have to start with what happened on was it Wednesday? That game was Wednesday, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I didn't get a chance to tell the story on the web version of the show, but I did tell it on satellite radio. I was watching that game. I had a previous obligation. We've changed our clocks here, so it happened a little bit later in the afternoon. U.S. time than I'm accustomed to for the Champions League, and I missed. I saw Juve go up 2-0. I thought, okay, that's it. I should have known better, Ross, but I thought, okay, that's it. It's Juve. They should be fine. They should see this out. I get home later in the evening and I check the score, and I'm shocked to find that not only did Bayern Munich execute a comeback and level the game in the dying moments, they scored twice in extra time and pretty much dominated the back end of that match. I don't know how do we frame what happened on Wednesday?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, maybe people will have some sympathy for the poor journalists who have to file for the 90th minute, because
yeah.
I don't know how many times I had to change what I was writing as I was going on. It was incredible. First of all, kudos to Juventus, because they were excellent for about an hour. I was saying to one of the guys in the press box at the Allianz that it was probably one of the most complete team performances that I've seen in a long time in the Champions League. They were great defensively, and great in midfield, and they were very, very good in attack. Fair play to them for the first 60 minutes.
And I think Ross, it's important to point out too that the carryover from the first leg, because Bayern went up 2-0 in the first half of that game in Turin. So over the course of the second half of the first leg and the first hour of the second leg, Juve absolutely, I don't say dominated. I suppose Bayern had a couple of chances in that second leg, but they controlled that. They played exactly how they wanted to, and they controlled. They control it. Okay. Trevor does this thing where he tells me things in the middle of me speaking and throws me off. But go ahead. Sorry, Ross.
No, sorry. It was like you say, it was kind of more Juve dominance than I think Bayern for that kind of first hour. And Juve go 2 up in 25 minutes, but it would not be an exaggeration to suggest that Juventus should have been 3 or 4 ahead by the hour mark. I mean, Cuadrado, sure, yeah. I think, had a chance just after half an hour to make it 3-0. Neuer made the save. Yeah. I think Pogba had one that was wrongly offside.
Morata did, definitely, yeah.
Morata had 2 as well in the second half. So it really was Juve's to win. And then all of a sudden, I think they just ran out of gas, and Bayern all of a sudden got a lot of momentum after Lewandowski's goal. And it's kind of a hard one to digest, because I think a lot of people would have been critical of Guardiola had Bayern gone out of this competition, but at the same time, they weren't exactly impressive. Okay, the last 15 minutes, they were completely dominant, but you'd expect that of a side chasing a goal in the last 15 minutes. You would expect that kind of response.
Well, and having not seen it, and I apologize for my ignorance to the audience here, but this is why you're on the show, Ross. And I imagine a lot of people here in the States had trouble watching the game live because, hey, it happened in the middle of our workday. But, expect Bayern to dominate as they chase that equalizer in the last 15 minutes. But how much of that was Juve on the back foot when they maybe shouldn't have been?
I think from a Juve point of view, I think a lot of it was down to taking off Sami Khedira and Morata. I mean, 2 excellent performers on the night, and you take those 2 players out of the team, especially when they're beginning to tire, and you replace them with players of inferior quality, then I think that certainly is one thing. I mean, credit as well to Pep Guardiola, because I think he made a couple of really important substitutions, bringing on Kingsley Coman, the kind of French winger who is on loan from Juventus. He was excellent. He was absolutely superb. And that kind of width was something that Bayern had been missing the whole first half. Juventus had really kind of stifled them. And one of the kind of main talking points was, why would you... why would you not start Kingsley Coman or Thiago from the beginning? Certainly when you're at home and you're trying to win the game, and obviously Guardiola brings him on with 20, 25 minutes to go, and they go on and win the game. So I think in one hand, you can say Pep Guardiola got his first kind of starting 11 wrong, but he made the right substitutions at the right time. And obviously, after Bayern got the second goal, I don't think there was any doubt that they were going to win that game.
Yeah, well, I mean, the momentum was all theirs. If that's something that you believe in, I'm certainly that there's no doubt about the quality of Bayern Munich and the type of players they can run out there. And I suppose in a lot of ways it's sort of fitting that the man who got the equalizer, put them into extra time, allowed for the 2 goals that they ultimately used to win the tie, was Thomas Muller. And Thomas Muller is a fascinating player because he is so against type for being world class. I mean, just give me some thoughts here, Ross, on what he means to Bayern Munich, and sort of again a guy that you don't look at and immediately peg him as good as he is.
No, I mean, I think the description that comes to mind is from the article that Barney Roney wrote for The Guardian, where he said that Thomas Muller essentially is a guy going into the park with his dog, going for a walk, and that's basically what he is when he's on the football pitch. He just walks around, looks for that little bit of space, and we have this argument sometimes here in Germany with Bundesliga reporters and commentators who are here, and we ask, is Thomas Muller, let's say, one of the 3 or 4 best players in world football, or is Thomas Muller an outstanding player, perhaps kind of as a result of the fact that he plays for Bayern Munich, where he has superb players around him, he's got superb coaches, and that kind of thing. So it's an interesting debate, but I mean, you can't argue with a guy who has been doing this, scoring 25, 30 goals a season for at least 4 or 5 years now. He's been doing it for the German national team. He's won the World Cup. He's won the Champions League. So his CV certainly looks better than mine. So I can't really have a go at him. But it's interesting to see that Guardiola, at the beginning of his reign, was very reluctant to play Thomas Muller, I think. He didn't really come across as the kind of player who would have been an obvious pick in a Guardiola-type team. And obviously in the last maybe 18 months or so, I think Guardiola has realised that really, to win games convincingly and dominantly, you have to play Thomas Muller, and you have to try and build the team around a player like that.
It's I feel for you having to change your gamer right there at the end with Muller scoring the equalizer, Ross. But beyond that, I mean, the events of the game, it was also about the narrative that was being written and then scrapped and then rewritten, and specifically, I mean, when it comes to the managers. I do think, at least in my timeline on Twitter and among the people I follow, and that's not everybody, and certainly not the German sources analyzing these things in German or the Italian sources analyzing these things in Italian, but it seemed to be a little bit less, this means Pep fails, if Juve had seen this out, this means Pep fails, and a little bit more praise for Allegri. How did that narrative shift, at least in your mind and the people around you, when it came to whether or not Bayern going out at this point with Pep a lame duck, going to City at the end of the year? How was that being viewed?
Well, I think that narrative that you mentioned there was probably a result of how dominant and how good Juventus were. I mean, I think people were kind of looking at it and going, okay, if they go out with the narrowest of margins, I think maybe people will start to maybe dig the dagger in where they can into Guardiola. But I think in this case, Juventus were so good in the first half; they were so dominant, and still sometimes when you watch Bayern in the Bundesliga and you see them not having a great game, but they've got players like Douglas Costa, they've got players like Lewandowski and Arjen Robben who can really turn the game on its head in the blink of an eye. There were so many times that Bayern tried to do that. They tried to give the ball to Douglas Costa, tried to give the ball to Lewandowski, and Juventus were so well organised at the back. I mean, trying to break that down looked so difficult, and I think even if Juventus had played against Barcelona, who I think are everyone's favourites to win the Champions League this year, they might have found it difficult as well. But I think the narrative was massive going into the game because I think if Bayern had lost that game, the obituaries would have probably been already written for Guardiola, because obviously he leaves in the summer to go to Manchester City. Bayern have a 5-point lead at the top of the Bundesliga, and I don't think there's much doubt that Bayern are going to go on and win the league. But for Guardiola, he hasn't won the Champions League in his 3-year stint in Germany, and for a lot of people, that's that's a way of quantifying his success and failure. Whether he actually wins the European Cup. I would tend to disagree. I think he has been a success. I think he's changed a lot of things. I think he's brought Bayern's football on a few more years. I think the way that they interchange positions, I think, is just phenomenal to watch.
Right.
However, I think that has been soured a little bit in the last 6 months since obviously he announced that publicly that he was leaving to Man City. There's been reports of the fact that the contract with Man City was signed a year ago, which I think Bayern certainly internally are quite annoyed about from what I can understand. Certainly the fans don't really have that kind of bond as well with Guardiola. I mean, one of the things that interested me was that 88 minutes and I've played in this game, and it was kind of similar to Claudio Ranieri on Monday at Leicester when he started to kind of throw his arms around and gesticulate to the crowd and tried to get everyone going. Ranieri got a response. Guardiola didn't really from the crowd. The crowd didn't seem to take to it, and the players emotionally didn't really take to it. I mean, obviously they scored in stoppage time, but that goal was kind of out of nothing because for the last few minutes of that game.
Well, obviously this is what you're painting, a picture of different dynamics, relationships. Claudio Ranieri coming in and doing something amazing at a club that was not fancied to even finish top half in their league, much less go and maybe win a title. Meanwhile, the expectations drew so high at Bayern Munich, and Pep Guardiola, the mercenary, Pep Guardiola, the Barcelona character. I mean, the character from another club who belonged so completely to another club. I do think that's changed, and his image is completely different now, especially with the move to City coming. But I imagine it seems very impersonal for those Bayern fans.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to compare it, maybe in Germany, you could compare it to obviously Jurgen Klopp at Dortmund, or maybe someone like Lucien Favre, who was at Mönchengladbach for 4 or 5 years. These guys had a very warm relationship with the supporters, and although people do criticise Bayern, for maybe having glory hunting fans and guys who maybe don't have the same passion as others, Bayern really do have a very good core fan base, and they are really passionately behind the team when they go away from home. They always fill out away allocations and stuff like that. So these guys didn't seem to feel the same affection for Guardiola as they would have for maybe Jupp Heynckes or even Louis van Gaal. I mean, I would be interested to survey Bayern fans whether they would find Van Gaal a more, right type of guy for that kind of job rather than Guardiola. But I mean, I don't think that's healthy for the club. I mean, I think certainly as I said earlier, I mean, from what I can understand, the Bayern hierarchy is not happy with Guardiola. There's been reports of maybe Guardiola tapping up a few players at the club to take Man City. So, I mean, it's not a really healthy situation despite what they're doing domestically. Okay, well,
they executed the comeback. They beat Juve. They are now into the quarterfinals, and we'll talk about the draw here shortly. But I do want to just go back in time and just put a bow on Wolfsburg advancing as well. Now, they're a very different sort of challenge for Wolfsburg against Ghent than Bayern Munich had against the Italian champion and a recent finalist. But Wolfsburg getting into the quarterfinals, we did. I suppose we already did talk about this. I guess we can move on. Let's do the draw because I think we've had you since Wolfsburg advanced. When you look at this draw, it's Bayern Munich against Benfica and it's Wolfsburg against Real Madrid. It's this. The theme here is the biggest powers, the favorites, certainly Bayern Munich and Barcelona. Avoid other favorites. I think Barca's got a tough out with Atleti, who knows them very well. But you would bet on Bayern Munich getting through. Wolfsburg, on the other hand, that's trouble, no matter what's going on at Real Madrid.
Yeah, I mean, from Wolfsburg's point of view, for a team that's 8th in the Bundesliga and already scrapping to get into Europe for next season, I think they'll just be happy to be in the quarterfinals. And for that club that let's be honest. I mean, let's put it in context. I mean, Wolfsburg. They're not a big club. They are a company-backed club by Volkswagen, and they've only really been prominent in German football since the mid-1990s when they brought in football directors, football executives, and they rose up very, very quickly. They got to the German Cup final and obviously won the league in 2009. That was the first year that they played in the Champions League, and also this is the second time. So for them to play Real Madrid, I think is quite massive. I mean, they've obviously got good players, guys like Julian Draxler, guys like Max Kruse, Andre Schürrle, who are international standard players. I just think this might be a little bit step too far for them. And you'd have to say that when they are 8th in the Bundesliga, they have probably bigger priorities right now.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, we'll see how things are going and where they are when that first leg against Real Madrid, the home leg, comes around on April 6th. I imagine that will dictate a lot of whether or not, you know, how they play. I mean, certainly, I imagine it's all about limiting damage when you're facing off against a Real Madrid. But that will inform that. Again, meanwhile, Bayern Munich and Benfica. I'm not trying to, you know, I don't want to put down Benfica, but we do know that Bayern Munich is a massive favorite to go probably all the way to the final, and this is a pretty kind draw.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think how Wolfsburg felt when they drew Ghent in the last 16 is probably exactly how Bayern Munich are feeling right now. I think Bayern will be, I wouldn't say relieved to have beaten Juventus. I mean, probably more kind of satisfied because that's what they expected. But I think to get Benfica in the quarterfinals is certainly quarterfinals is a big stroke of luck. But you know, you have to beat what's in front of you, and I mean, I think the draw certainly from a wider view looks quite predictable. I think you could probably see that it will be Bayern, Real Madrid, probably Barcelona, and one of PSG, Man City in the semi-finals.
Yeah, I mean, if Manchester City can make it to the semis, wow, that would be quite the achievement for them. Let's see. Let's briefly touch on the news that David Alaba has signed a new contract. Important for Bayern Munich to lock him up.
Yeah, it's a massive move from Bayern Munich. I mean, I think a lot of people kind of rave about Lewandowski and Müller and Robin and Costa. These guys score the goals, do the assists, but David Alaba, in spite of his performance against Juventus, I must say, is just an outstanding player. He probably is your kind of archetypal modern footballer. He is so intelligent tactically. He's so flexible on the pitch, great technically, and he's just got great athleticism as well. So, that's a great move for Bayern Munich, and he's probably the biggest asset as well. I mean, for a guy who obviously has been at Bayern for 4 or 5 years now, the fans really identify with him. He obviously has won European Cups. He's been in European finals. Probably exactly the guy that you would want to take forward. And it's very interesting to see how Ancelotti uses him next season, because when you observe Ancelotti at a new club, he tends to throw in a little bit of a curveball. You know, someone like Angel Di Maria playing in kind of left central midfield at Real Madrid. And you wonder if David Alaba is the kind of guy now at 23, 24 years old where he would rather play in midfield than at left back. Yeah, so that's something to keep an eye on.
That leads me into a question of how things, I mean, it's good for Bayern Munich to lock up Alaba, have him there. He's proven to be, a truly excellent player. Certainly that regardless of who the manager is, he'll be in the team and he should be fine. But you do wonder when Pep leaves how that changes things for Alaba, because Pep was so instrumental in sort of finding a place for Alaba to be most influential on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I had this discussion with someone on Wednesday. Do you really think this group of Bayern players actually needs a head coach? I mean, they are so professional and so driven, and you know, obviously guys like Philip Lahm have been and done so much in the game, and you kind of wonder if they actually really need somebody to be changing things every weekend. Maybe Ancelotti is exactly what they're looking for, a guy who will create the right atmosphere. I'm actually going through one of his books at the moment, and you know, this is one thing he always talks about is he talks about food a lot. Apparently, I mean, this is what a great way to endear yourself to
there you go.
to players when you can just kind of laugh around about your weight and stuff like that, and how he loves pizza and cakes, and you can imagine that's going to fit in really well at Bayern Munich.
Oh wow, there you go. You know, it's interesting that you bring up that concept of whether or not a team like Bayern Munich needs a head coach, needs a manager, needs somebody to sort of hold the hands of grown adult men who understand this game probably as well as anybody, especially at that club. There's an article by my friend Richard Whittle at pastemagazine.com that you should check out. It actually asked that very question: do soccer teams really need managers? And conceives of a situation where, you know, the captain sort of figures that the team talks through these things. The captain figures some things out that traditionally a manager would. But do you actually absolutely need that coaching figure, you know, going up and down the sideline? And absolutely true, Ross, and this is a bigger discussion we don't have time for today, but it's absolutely true that we put managers on pedestals that maybe sometimes they don't deserve. And that goes for Pep and Klopp and Carlo Ancelotti and everybody else.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe you can look at, you know, Chelsea, for example, guys like Jose Mourinho, who are, do great things for that football club, and then all of a sudden things maybe don't go according to plan, then they're booted out, and someone else comes in and takes over. It doesn't really change much and gets the results, and now all of a sudden he's the saviour. I don't know what someone can do over 2 or 3 weeks that would make such a massive difference. So I would kind of agree with that. I definitely have to check that article out.
It's a very interesting idea. Maybe I'll talk about it later on in fuller detail. We are focusing in on Germany. Let's talk about Dortmund, because they have advanced past Spurs in the Europa League, and now because Liverpool took down Manchester United yesterday, we have a draw that has placed Jurgen Klopp and his new club against his old club in Dortmund, Dortmund, in the Europa League quarterfinals. I'm being told by my friend Robert in LA that this is being called El Clopico, which is just terrible pun. How big of a deal is this going to be?
Just think of the narrative, Jason. It's going to be fantastic. I can't wait to dig out my folder of Klopp gifts, because that is going to be one hell of a game. I mean, I think also what's interesting is that obviously Dortmund are coming off the back of a tie where they absolutely thumped the second-ranked team in English football. So I'm not saying that's a reflection on the standard of English football, but that was quite an impressive achievement from Dortmund in the last round to beat Spurs so convincingly. Even if it was a second-string team, obviously, Spurs' second-string team is pretty strong, but Dortmund went about that superbly well, and you look at the front three of Aubameyang, Mkhitaryan, and Marco Reus, and it truly is one of the top three, I think, attacks in Europe. And you maybe begs the question: if Dortmund were in the Champions League, would they be a contender for the title? You'd probably have to say so. I think.
Yeah. I mean, well, obviously, look, this is why the fortunes of a club like Dortmund, who, while among the best clubs in Europe, it's difficult to maintain that elite position. And we've seen it with Manchester United. We've seen it with Liverpool over the last decade. If you don't keep yourself in that upper echelon, sometimes it can have major ramifications. But Dortmund, more than anybody else, more than Liverpool and Manchester United, certainly have recaptured what it was that made them elite. If they go on, I guess, suppose they're prioritizing this thing, Ross. I mean, they're going to make the Champions League places in Germany regardless. But I imagine that winning a Europa League is sort of a symbol of recapturing what it was that they were under Jurgen Klopp.
Yeah. I mean, they've got a 19-point cushion to qualify for the Champions League, so I don't think they're going to throw that away in the last 8 games of the season. And I think Dortmund would be one of a few clubs who would actually have won all 3 European competitions: the Champions League, the European Cup Winners' Cup, obviously before it was defunct in 98, and the UEFA Cup. I think there's only 4 or 5 teams who have actually achieved that. I think maybe Ajax, Chelsea, and maybe Bayern Munich are those kind of 3 or 4 clubs who have done that. So for Dortmund, there's obviously some incentive there, and I think I know people kind of write off the Europa League, but it's a European trophy, and if Dortmund can add a European trophy to their cabinet this season, they obviously will qualify for the Champions League anyway, and maybe add the German Cup at the end of the season. That would be a pretty outstanding season considering where they were 18 months ago.
The other, Dortmund advancing, as you said, pretty impressively against Spurs. Meanwhile, Bayer Leverkusen out of the tournament now after a goalless draw in the second leg against Villarreal. How much disappointment is there for Leverkusen?
I think there would be massive disappointment at losing the first leg 2-0 in Spain. I think after that it was a bit of a mountain to climb, and there's a lot of questions being asked of where Leverkusen are actually going as a club, because there's a lot of kind of talk online about Roger Schmidt, the coach, being very good tactically and having a vision and implementing a really good style of football. But you'd have to say that a team like Leverkusen shouldn't be 7th place in the Bundesliga. They shouldn't be getting knocked out of the Europa League so early on. They probably should be contending, especially when you've got guys like Javier Hernandez and Çalhanoğlu. And again, I mean, if Leverkusen, I think certainly the one thing to look out for your audience would be if Leverkusen don't qualify for the Champions League, then you would imagine that Chicharito would probably be looking for a new club.
Yeah, that's interesting. Certainly, I imagine he would still have options on the continent, but if there is a big offer, either back home in Mexico or perhaps here in the United States, he may be enticed to make that leap, especially because, the modern world, Ross, it's not just about what club you play for and what trophies you can win. It's also about your commercial profile and your brand. Chicharito's brand would be huge in the United States, obviously. All right, let's briefly here before I have to let you go look at the table as it sits. Bayern Munich 5 points up on Dortmund, as you mentioned. Both of those Dortmund with a huge cushion to qualify for the Champions League next year, so that's going to be fun. The gap then is between Dortmund and Hertha Berlin. Mönchengladbach in fourth at the moment. Schalke a point back. Mainz 2 points back of Gladbach. Bayer Leverkusen in that mix still. So what do you see playing out here over the last bit of the season, the last 8 games, that will determine the Champions League?
I think you might see a couple of the clubs who maybe haven't had European competition come to the fore. I look at a team like Mainz, for example, who I think over the course of the second half of the season have been one of the strongest teams in terms of form. I don't think they're a side that you can easily write off. I think, given how close it is, all it would take would be one more victory for Mainz and they could be fourth place in the Bundesliga. I think you'll see Hertha probably qualify for the Champions League either third or fourth. But for Schalke, Leverkusen and Wolfsburg, I mean, they've really not hit expectations this season, and I think from their point of view, there will be a little bit of an inquest this summer. I think what else we can look out for probably is Hanover going down. Hoffenheim obviously coming back has opened it up. Now we have 5 clubs separated by 3 points, and that is Augsburg, Darmstadt, Bremen, Frankfurt, and Hoffenheim. So that's probably something to keep an eye out on as well.
And the last thing here for the American audience, Hoffenheim, as you said, at the bottom of the table, right, or not the bottom, but in the relegation zone, in that mix to see who's going to stay up. And they do have an American there, Russell Knus, who you pointed out to me, made his Hoffenheim debut. I believe that was last week. Just if you know anything about Russell Knus, but also about Hoffenheim's chances of staying up in general.
Yeah, I think they've got a good chance of staying up. Their coach is a 28-year-old, Julian Nagelsmann, the youngest coach in Bundesliga history.
What?
So I mean that's a very interesting narrative to have to. And to be fair to Hoffenheim, I mean they've got a squad that really should be mid-table at least. They've got some international players, guys who are in the Champions League. So that's that I think that's what they would be expecting this season, and they can still achieve a pretty comfortable finish in the last 8 games of the season. With Russell Knus, all I know is that he won obviously the youth championship at Hoffenheim with Nagelsmann as a coach. So you would imagine that the relationship is already there, and he might get more game time. I think he's a holding midfield player. He was the captain of the youth team here in Germany with Hoffenheim, and I think he was the captain of the under-20 American team as well. So an interesting player to keep an eye on. And I think Hoffenheim, I think they are looking to inject a little bit of freshness into their team. They've already brought some youth players up into the first team squad. So again, that's certainly another player to keep an eye on, I think.
Okay, there you go. Russell Knus, a product of Pennsylvania, 20 years old, central midfielder at Hoffenheim, worth a watch. Ross Dunbar joining us to talk German football. Ross Dunbar 93 is his Twitter handle, which you should absolutely go and follow right now. Ross, thank you so much for the time. I mean, we could do this for hours, but we'll have to save it for next time.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me again. Cheers.
There goes Ross. We will step aside, come back. Eric Gomez is ready to go. He's told me he's ready. We're going to talk Mexico, Mexican national team, maybe Chicharito Hernandez. Don't go anywhere. Be right back.
Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
All right, we're back on a Friday, man. This is a good show already, and it's just going to stay right at that excellent level of quality with our friend Eric Gomez, who joins us now to talk Mexican football. Eric Gomez, 86 on your Twitters. Hi, Eric. How are you?
We finally made it. So
we're here. We just discussed the lack of communication or whatever, the synchronicity between the United States and Mexico when it comes to daylight savings time. But it doesn't matter. You're here. Let's start with the Mexico roster for the qualifiers coming up. Obviously, we've got a situation where these are not the most challenging games that Mexico is going to face in qualifying, and yet I imagine there's plenty for Osorio to try to figure out.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, this is the first time in a very long time, I think ever, that a foreign team has pretty much been the base of the Mexican national team in terms of call-ups. So you've got 3 players from Porto, Layun Herrera and Tecatito Corona. Mm-hmm. No other Liga MX team, no other team in general with 3 call-ups. So that just shows you how far Mexico has gone in the last decade or so when it comes to exporting players and just the mentality of Mexican players in general. I remember looking at these lists 2005, 2006, 2007, and you would only have two foreign players on the list. The fact remains 9 players, Europe-based players for Osorio, and we're still talking about absentees. We're still talking about Carlos Vela not being there.
Okay.
We're talking Memo Ochoa, etc.
And I not necessarily Memo Ochoa, but and the name. Okay, so Carlos Vela definitely, especially because of the high-profile return to the team, etc. and so forth. But also Giovanni, and at the same time, I know my cursory understanding of where things sit for El Tri at the moment is that neither of those players, despite their quality when they're on their game, neither of those players are in form. Neither of those players are complete. Well, I know Giovanni's not completely healthy, so it's not necessarily a shock that they're not on this list.
That's true. Regardless, it's still, I think, a testament to how strong the Mexico team is at this point in time. Yeah. That you would not call up Vela, you would not have the possibility of calling up either Dos Santos' brother, Memo Ochoa, guys who, again, are playing abroad, making a pretty penny, doing quite well for themselves in general. And even though neither of those 4 players have been called up, you still have a very, very competitive squad in front of you. You've got guys who were recently in the Champions League, recently in the Europa League, fighting for European spots for next season, fighting for league championships. And then you've got a pretty healthy Liga MX base. Chivas is doing pretty terribly, and they've still managed to get 2 players into that national team list. And if you look at the U23s, I think they've got 8 players on that list. So it's a really, really strange but a really positive time to be a Mexico national team fan with these rosters.
Yeah. So, and again, it's qualifying. I suppose you don't take anything for granted. Canada's going to give Mexico their best shot, and I would argue that this is probably the best Canada's been in a very long time. Of course, that doesn't mean they should beat Mexico or should give Mexico much of a run in either one of these games. But there is going to be a sort of a challenge, especially against a team that's going to try to be organized and compact and make Mexico break them down. So when we look ahead to the actual games, who is Osorio going to rely on to be the players to actually go against a Canadian defense and score the goals?
Right, and it's a strange thing because you've got, I think, 5 players over the age of 30 on this list, but you've also got 6 players who are U23s on that list. So we're looking at that generational shift right before our eyes. I think Osorio relishes that he's been given 2 games in 5 days against Canada, and despite these aren't friendlies, of course, these are World Cup qualifiers, but I think he realizes that he can have a little bit of flexibility with his roster. He can make a couple of experiments at this point. Rafa Marquez is still on this team. I don't expect him to play. And to answer your question, I don't expect him to be one of those guys that Osorio relies on the pitch, but he's definitely a player who will bring stability, leadership, yada, yada, yada. And then you've got guys who are pretty much just in the absolute prime of their careers, like Chicharito, Miguel Layún, Hector Herrera, Raúl Jiménez, guys who are still in their 20s, guys who you fully expect to get to Russia 2018. You just want to get those guys into playing shape, and you want to get them, I think, meshing to your style of play, which is Osorio is definitely a guy who has been different from the average Mexican national team coach for the last few years. So we'll see a team that is, I think, strictly based on what you've got going on for you in Europe, with a couple of Liga MX players thrown in there for good measure. But it's pretty close to Mexico's 18 for sure.
Yeah, look, all of these good things, all of these positives. Again, I mean, I want to come back to Vela just very quickly because the guy's mercurial. That's one of my favorite words to describe footballers, especially of his type. And you've given us a thumbnail sketch of his personality, not necessarily, a guy who plays for the love of the game, a guy who plays because he happens to be good at it, and he's got other interests, and he can be distracted pretty easily. And it seems as though things have sort of gone that direction at Sociedad recently. How much of that is the reason for him not being in this team?
Yeah, I think Vela wishes he were 6'7" so he could play in the NBA. The official reason that Carlos Vela is not on this team is that they want him to get back to the closest that he possibly can to 100% at the club level, so that they can call him up for Copa America. I think there's no secret in terms of where they want to place Vela come this summer. Of course, Mexico having the opportunity to play in the 2016 Olympics as well, so they've got 3 players that they can choose from any age group to strengthen that team and defend their gold medal and also the Copa America. But Vela is one of those guys who's going to be in the United States this summer, so they want him healthy. They want him 100%. I think there's no controversy this time as to why they didn't call him.
So Mexico again, 2 qualifiers coming up in that window against Canada. This is also, you mentioned Copa America. There's the Olympics coming up for Mexico as well. So plenty on the docket for Juan Carlos Osorio. In general, as you mentioned, the talent level is certainly there. What are the, I don't even know how to say this. What are the goals for 2016 beyond, beat the teams you're supposed to beat? I mean, is there a target in the Copa America? Is there a target at the Olympics? Obviously, they're defending champions.
I think Osorio is being smart enough not to fall into that media trap. You've seen Mexico managers in the past put unnecessary pressure on themselves by saying outright, well, you know what? I don't think we would be in the World Cup if we didn't think that we could win it. That was Miguel Herrera back in 2014. And of course, Mexico exited at their usual round of 16 time in that tournament. You've got guys saying that they want to do this or that in Copa Americas in the past, Confederations Cup, etc., and it usually ends up blowing up in their face. I think Osorio is at least 4 or 5 months before we get to those tournaments, not falling into that trap and then saying, hey, we need to get to the semifinals, at least in Copa America, etc. I think Mexico needs to win their group in Copa America, and then after that, it's knockout football. It really does depend on who you get. Yeah. This is the Copa America. This is, I think, one of those tournaments where you can't really be at fault if you get a Brazil or if you get an Argentina and bow out. These are top world-class teams. Mexico is yet to make that big step towards first world legitimacy in the football world. Yeah. But I think with a guy like Osorio, they truly believe over at the FMF that they can do that. Whether it comes in 2016, whether it comes in 2018, I think they'd rather do that in Russia, to be fair with you. Beyond that, the Olympics are just a completely different thing, and you've got a completely different guy coaching that team. The expectation, I think, is a little bit higher because you won in 2012, right. But it's still a great thing to be able to defend the title. At the youth level, Mexico has had that experience a couple of times, and you've got players on that U23 team who have won the World Cup at the U17 level. So I think it bodes well for Mexico as we move forward in time, that these guys that they're calling upon for the U23 program are players who have that massive international experience. Even then, I think fans are secretly hoping for at least a semifinal run in the Copa America, and if Mexico can get onto that podium again in Rio, that would pretty much be the perfect summer.
All right, looking at the Copa America situation, as you said, the goal would be to win the group, of course. The challenger for Mexico is Uruguay, Jamaica and Venezuela, the other two teams. If Mexico wins the group, they're more than likely, well, you don't know what's going to happen in Group D. I think most people would have Argentina winning Group D. But either way, you're getting Argentina or Chile. So, as you said, It's knockout football. It's going to be either against the defending Copa America champions or one of the best teams of the world. And yeah, we don't exactly know who's going to be on the field for either of those teams. We don't know what kind of squad Chile's going through a coaching change as well. And Argentina, Messi and his burdens and all of those things. Who knows exactly what's going to happen here? And then there's the question of overage players in the Olympics and et cetera, et cetera. So, and for Mexico too. I mean, that's absolutely true for Mexico. I just wanted to look at the 2012 Olympic roster for Mexico. You had obviously Giovanni Dos Santos was a key figure in that team. At only 23 years of age at the time. Who else from that team have we actually seen come through? Because obviously Giovanni's in a trough right now when it comes to his national team future. Marco Fabian just back in the team. He was a major figure in that club in that side as well.
Yeah, he was. I mean, Giovanni, I remember, I think got injured in the semifinal game, and just didn't have the opportunity to even play in that gold medal match. But from that team, you have seen guys like Hector Herrera, who at the time was playing for Pachuca, now over at Porto. Marco Fabian, you mentioned, who is at Chivas now, playing in the Bundesliga. A couple of other guys who have made the leap. Raul Jimenez, who is at America now, over at Benfica. Diego Reyes, who bought by Porto, but right now is over at Real Sociedad in La Liga. And then some guys who are still in Liga MX who have been regular fixtures in the national team. Javier Aquino is one of those guys. We've seen plenty of Miguel Ponce, who was at Chivas at the time.
Yeah.
Javier Cortez, a couple of guys who have been pretty key for Mexico moving forward. Not even half of that team, I think, is a regular national team fixture. But I think what Mexican fans and Mexican media have learned from U17 runs and U23 runs and U20 runs is that if you can develop at least 3 of those guys from each team, you're in great shape. I don't really expect. There's a reason why Nigeria isn't a world power at the senior level. They dominate U17s, they dominate U20s, but then they're not able to develop most of those players at the senior level. At least Mexico is getting a healthy rate of players to that senior team, and if they're able to continue to do that, like I mentioned before, it just bodes very well for the Mexican system, for the Mexican program, to be able to, for lack of a better word, graduate these guys onto the main stage. Mm-hmm. For the 2016 team, and we still don't know for sure who's going to be there, but there are a lot of very promising players. And I mentioned that at the senior level, you've got 5 guys who are U23s. I mean, Tecatito Corona, who's playing for Porto right now, one of the most exciting players that Mexico has ever produced, in my opinion, can play in the Olympics. So, Osorio has some very interesting decisions. You've got the Pachuca kids, Rodolfo Pizarro, Irving Lozano. I mentioned one of the guys from Chivas, Pineda, is 19 years old. It's just going to be very interesting for Mexico to kind of look at their roster for the Olympic Games and say, how strong can we actually get?
All right, let's. We didn't get a chance to talk to you earlier in the week. I mean, it's great that we have you on now, especially because of the timing of the roster release for the qualifiers. But we didn't get a chance to talk to you earlier in the week about the Clásico in Mexico, Chivas de Guadalajara and Club America. Obviously, the fortunes for the last couple of years have been very different between these two clubs, and as always, very intense, very physical. The passion does not go away, no matter where Guadalajara is these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I got to plug my buddy Tom Marshall here because he wrote a very good story after the Clásico. It was just as he wrote, it was an epic Clásico, and I think nobody expected that. Nobody expected it to be that good because Chivas is just desperate for points at this point. they're still not out of the woods when it comes to relegation. Although Dorados, their only competitor, is very, very bad. I don't expect them to hang around that much longer. So at least they've got that to look forward to in a couple of weeks. But it's just been dismal for them. It's just been absolutely terrible for them. And I think most people expected America to go into the Estadio Chivas now. They've gone through a name change there over in Guadalajara and win that game without a shadow of a doubt. And for a little while, it leaned towards that outcome. You know, you had America up 2-0, Oribe Peralta scoring, Darwin Quintero scoring, Chivas with a controversial goal disallowed in the first half, but they were just absolutely crushed. You know, at one point Guadalajara was playing with 10 men. It just looked like America was going to romp to the finish and win this 4-0, 5-0. And then, as we all know, America gives away a silly red card, and then all of a sudden Chivas score and they're back into this game. You know, quite honestly, I think Chivas deserved to draw that game. They deserve to get a point at the end of the game. But you know, when you're in that bad of a run of form, and your opponent seemingly blessed with the best of luck all season long, because America, in all fairness, has not been the best team either. It was just very difficult for Chivas to come away with anything other than a loss from that game. But it was the most interesting Clásico that I've seen, at least for the last, I think, 3 or 4 years. And it really shows where both organizations are at this point in time. You know, America, their 100th anniversary is this year. There are people talking about how America might sign Zlatan or Radamel Falcao or even Fernando Torres. I mean, crazy rumors being thrown about because America has that type of cachet. They have that type of economic power. And Chivas, on the other hand, you know, 110 years of history, 11 league titles, and anything that their fans can ever talk about for the last, I think, 18, 24 months is, are we going to go down to the second division? So it's just harrowing to see these teams with such different stories.
You and I have talked about the possibility in the past, and I'm you know, sort of in the vein of the Joker wanting to watch the world burn a little bit. I'd be curious to see what happens should Guadalajara go down, because you and I have talked about, is that something that the ownership and the TV companies would actually allow to happen, or would there be a shift of franchise rights, et cetera, Vergara and all of that. I didn't realize what. Just very briefly, Eric, what's the reason for the change from Estadio Omnilife to Chivas?
Well, Chivas owner Jorge Vergara is going through a divorce right now. And, and it looks like, I mean, he founded the company that used to bear that stadium's name. Right. But it looks like his now soon-to-be ex-wife is going to end up with the company. So. Oh
man, when rich people, I mean, not necessarily wishing ill will on Jorge Vergara. I don't have any particular interest in seeing him suffer, but I imagine that's got to be some schadenfreude on the part of Chivas fans, for one thing, just because of the way that he's sort of navigated the ship poorly during his time as the owner at Guadalajara. All right, so let's hear, as we run out of time, hit on a couple of rumors. I know we talked about Carlos Vela in the national team, and some of the, you know, the most recent sort of incidents that have happened in Spain with Sociedad and whether or not he's committed and all of these things. But the rumors of him coming back, coming to MLS have popped up again. Is there a reason for that? I mean, it just seems to be out of the blue that, it's still a possibility this summer.
Yeah, you mentioned it a few minutes ago, and you used the perfect word for it. One of my favorite words, too. He's mercurial. He's one of those guys who you never know when he's going to, quote, get sick, end quote, of playing in Europe, because he's been there for the last 10 years. He finally had the amount of success that he was hoping for at Real Sociedad. He finally kind of silenced those critics. He finally made a point to make the FMF and whoever was coaching the national team at the time want him to play desperately, and he said no for 2.5 years. I think he's accomplished most of what he set out to do in Europe. He's made a lot of money there as well, don't get me wrong, but his off-the-field interests are much more akin to living and playing in the United States or Canada than to playing in Spain. He's mentioned several times that he loves living in San Sebastián, the sleepy little town where Real Sociedad is, because despite the fact that people know him it's just a very calm lifestyle, and he's not hounded by paparazzi the way that he was in London. He has his privacy. He's able to meet up with friends and do whatever. I think he took that for granted because a couple of weeks ago, I think 1 week ago, he was just fined 100,000 euros because he skipped out on practice to go to a Chris Brown concert. And I think that was either in Madrid or Barcelona. That was not in San Sebastián. So he got caught for that, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it all goes back to Rafa Marquez's quote when he was playing for the Red Bulls, and he said, I'm walking down Times Square with my wife, and nobody is even making eye contact with me. And that is the most beautiful thing that has ever happened to me. That's an actual Rafa Marquez quote. Yeah. So I think guys in the vein of Carlos Vela relish that, and if they're able to parlay that into a $5, $6, $7 million a year DP contract, they will take that money. And I think MLS is banking on that as well. So I think whether he ends up in Colorado, whether he ends up in Chicago or wherever, it's going to be very interesting to see whether Carlos Vela follows in Giovanni's footsteps and takes the money after Copa America.
All right, let's come to another player that's been linked to MLS, and I think this is because he's actually spoken out about it. It's Angel Reyna, 31 years old, obviously. At this point, MLS making it a priority to try to attract these players. He's not quite in the same group as a Giovanni Dos Santos or Carlos Vela, but I'm sure he would be an asset to some team in MLS. Right,
and I would take anything that Angel Reyna says with a grain of salt.
Okay,
just because he's that type of guy. Right, and he's out of a job right now. He was most recently with Chivas. He was making $1.8 million a year, one of the highest paid players in the Liga MX, and now he's suddenly out of a job. And this is a guy who was 2 years ago he was a national teamer. He was one of those guys that Chepo de la Torre or Victor Manuel Vucetich would look to off the bench for a solution. He's just a very talented, great player. He has won the Golden Boot in Mexico. He has pretty much been one of the most talented. He's one of those guys who he's Vela, but I think on a much smaller scale. You don't understand why he doesn't use his talents at the level that he should be. He's one of those guys who, when he was 26, 27, most people still expected to move to Europe, but that just never came to pass. Yeah. And he's been bouncing around from team to team after he left America, I think 2012. He's still worth something to an MLS team. I don't think he's worth seven figures anymore. I don't think you even need to throw a full DP contract at him. Maybe you could throw some of that targeted allocation money to get him.
Yeah, that's the question: is how much he would cost.
Yeah, exactly. That's the first time I've used the term targeted allocation money. In
welcome to the dark side, Eric.
Right. Exactly. But he's a very talented player. I just think that whether he's interested in the project, whether you keep him motivated, is the main issue. And when I spoke about this on Twitter with a couple of my followers, it's just who do you want coaching a guy like Angel Reyna? Who's going to be that drill sergeant who also has the capability to turn around and coddle him when he needs it? Because he's a head case. Okay. Plain and simple, that's how I describe Angel Reyna. He's very talented, but he's a head case. Yeah. And it really needs to be the perfect situation for him to be able to thrive again.
Okay. Last thing here, very briefly before I let you go. A little bit being made here in the States about Sebastian Salcedo coming back into the U.S. fold. He's a U20 player. He's included in Tab Ramos' U20 Dallas Cup team. He did get a call up for the Mexican national team and did go, I think, maybe even played in a couple of games. How is that? I mean, individual cases by individual cases, Eric, but how is that? This particular player, how is he viewed within the Mexican setup? And is there still a sense that he could flip back, or do they want him? How's that work?
Yeah, again, he played, I think, one match for the U20s last year, and he did so after having played a couple of games with the U.S. Fans in Mexico, they're becoming more and more accustomed to seeing Mexican American players do this, switch back and forth with their allegiances, or say at one point, hey, I want to play for Mexico, and then the next day, well, you know what, I'm suiting up for the USA. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I still think that he has a chance to make it in Mexico. He's a very talented player. I mean, he's playing for Veracruz at the moment,
Yeah.
so they're getting a long look at him. But I don't know. I think that he's one of those guys that, given again the right situation to develop, because Mexico's not the easiest league to get minutes in when you're 19 years old, like Saucedo is. But the fact that Veracruz would go out of their way to sign him at least on a loan deal speaks to what he's able to do. He's an interesting player. I don't have the U20 national team sheet in front of me for Mexico, but again, this is a point in time where El Tri is pretty much rife with talent at every one of those youth team levels. So I think guys like Saucedo step back and say, well, I was in training camp with most of these guys. Right. Am I going to be able to get subsequent call-ups? So I think it's a very personal thing for players like Saucedo, and if he feels that he has, because he's had a taste of both camps, if he feels like he has a better shot at being a regular U.S. men's national team call-up, then he'll make that choice, and I wouldn't blame him for it.
Yeah, look, and I haven't had this conversation in a while, and obviously I don't have direct knowledge of how these kids feel, because I'm not a dual international. I'm not Mexican American, but I've talked to enough of them. I mean, I remember a conversation with Christian Lucatero, who was recently signed as a homegrown player by the Dynamo. He's a Texan kid. He's had a chance to go to camp. I don't know that he played for Mexico, but he went to a youth national team camp. He's been back in the U.S. setup since then. These kids don't think of it in the black and white terms that some fans tend to, especially fans who are committed to one side or the other based on their passion. It just doesn't work that way for a Lucatero or a Saucedo or anybody else, for that matter, who has connections to both countries. So we'll see what happens with Saucedo. All right,
listen, you hit the nail on the head real quick there. I mean, this is a column that I've been meaning to write for a long time. As a Mexican American, I tell you this: I've lived, studied, worked in both countries. I was born in the United States, but I have Mexican parents. I love the United States, and I think I put myself in those shoes several times. And despite the fact that if I were a football player, I would love to play for Mexico as my first choice. If the United States came knocking on my door and said, "Hey, we want you to play," I would relish and I would cherish that chance, and I would play my heart out for the USA. So, I think that's the situation that a lot of those kids are in currently, and it's hard to assimilate for, and I don't mean to be rude here, but it's hard to assimilate for a lot of fans who are in American Outlaws or in Barra Bravas for Mexican teams. Those hardcore fans who look at the flag and say, how could you choose to do anything other than play for this country? It's not black and white, as you said.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a zero-sum game. If you play for Mexico, or as you said, in your particular case, Eric, if you were in that position, you would love to play for Mexico, but it's not like that means you wouldn't play for the United States if they called you up. And first of all, that's a ridiculous position to put any player in. If Mexico calls you, you play for them, you want to play for Mexico. But if Mexico doesn't come calling and the United States does, are you supposed to turn down the U.S. because you're being loyal to Mexico? Come on, that's ridiculous.
No, and it's not just that you would say, oh, the USA is kind of this second-tier option. Right. Absolutely not.
No, of course not.
If USA came to my door and said, we want you to play for us, I would fall in love. I mean, I'm already in love with that team and that country. But I would play my heart out. You know what I mean? You're not going to give anything less than 100%. It doesn't
fit what we view, how we view our sports and the passion that we have for our teams and how committed we are. How tribal it is. I mean, can you be parts of two tribes? You can, but fans don't always see that is something they're willing to get on board with. Eric Gomez, go follow him. Eric Gomez 86. Man, what a good conversation. We had two really good ones today. Eric, I'm out of time. I appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a quick break. I will try to squeeze in a couple of phone calls. I pushed that longer. There were things we had to cover. Don't go anywhere. Be right back.
Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
All right, here we go. Back on Soccer Morning. Limited time to take your phone calls, but the lines are open. 646-832-3909. And let's hit some news, man. So the New York Cosmos are making... Well, okay. The New York Cosmos, the actual soccer team, just made some news. But there's also the New York Cosmos past their glory days in the news, because I saw yesterday, I was tipped by Tim on Twitter, that there's going to be, or at least they're trying to put together, a drama television show based on the original New York Cosmos. That is fascinating to me. I want to talk about that. But also, the new New York Cosmos, which sounds like something from Futurama, have just signed Niko Kranjčar, which is a pretty big deal. I mean, yesterday on SiriusXM, I talked a little bit about Joe Cole potentially going to the Tampa Bay Rowdies, and I was even tipped to the fact it didn't come from him directly. I don't have an in with Joe Cole, but I was told that Joe Cole did not necessarily squash the notion that he could end up as a Tampa Bay Rowdy. So you could have, in pretty quick succession, as the NASL season rolls towards starting in 2016, Niko Kranjčar as a member of the New York Cosmos and Joe Cole playing in Tampa Bay. And while no one's going to hold up either one of those players as elite at this point in their careers, those are pretty damn good signings for NASL. In fact, you could argue that those are players that would fit fine in MLS even at this point. Maybe less Joe Cole than Niko Kranjčar. And as has been pointed out, Charlie Boehm and a couple other people, it's all about interest and commitment for Niko Kranjčar, who, by the way, is 31. It's not like he's ancient at this point. Niko Kranjčar with how many caps does he have for Croatia? 81 caps for Croatia. I mean, you got to be pretty good to have 81 caps for Croatia. Last played with Dino Kiev. Is that where he was last? I'm not sure. But yeah, you remember him from Tottenham. You remember him from QPR the last couple of years, where I think he made some appearances. In fact, that may be where he's played most recently is QPR. So they're in the championship. And so Niko Kranjčar now a member of the New York Cosmos. That's a big deal for them. 646-832-3909. Because we did push this, and again, I apologize, but that was a really good conversation with Eric. Because we did push this, only got about 5 minutes here. So if you want to get in, you got to jump in now. Or we'll just wrap it up. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It is Friday. You all are looking forward to your weekend. We didn't do much of a preview in the end of the games coming up in the Bundesliga or Liga MX or MLS for that matter. But I'm sure there's some pretty strong games coming up. I think we've got tonight in MLS, NYCFC in Orlando. Oh, and I'll throw this out there because I just remembered. Turns out that I'm going to be I'm going to go out, have a beer, and watch that game tonight. There's a soccer bar in the D.C. Metro in Northern Virginia that I'm going to hang out at. If you are in D.C., find me on Twitter at DavisJSN. Maybe we can grab a beer and watch that game. Enjoy the SAP function if they put the sound on for that game. NYCFC hosting Orlando City at Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. Also, on the weekend, just from an MLS perspective, the California Classico coming up tomorrow. That's always a big game. If you have MLS Live, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, you can watch that one. The national TV games on Sunday, DC United and Colorado, which I don't understand why that one's on the schedule. I got called out for hating on DC United the other day. And come on, what is there to like about DC United right now? Really? We're going to have somebody's going to have you love your team, you defend your team, but is there anything to be excited about right now for DC United? And then Sporting Kansas City and Toronto is the nightcap on Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern. All right. Let's see. Yeah, there you go. I think that's about it. That's a good show, right? It's a good Friday. Phone lines are not ringing. I'm going to release Trevor Hayward from his screening duties. We'll just go ahead and close out this show. Appreciate Ross Dunbar and Eric Gomez for their contributions today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Morning. I don't know. Just be on the lookout for news and stuff as related to as it relates to the show. Just be aware. Let's just say that. I'll talk to you guys on Monday. Bye.